Imagine waking up to a notification that changes your DNA. A $50 million jackpot landing in your lap instantly. For Adam, a hard-working man living paycheck to paycheck, this wasn't just a dream, it was his new reality. He held the golden ticket, a piece of paper worth more than the lifetime earnings of 1,000 people combined. But wealth without financial literacy is like a high-performance supercar in the hands of someone who cannot drive. As Robert Kiyosaki often says, it's not how much money you make, but how much money you keep. In this documentary-style breakdown, we explore the tragic 5-year collapse of a man who had it all. The first week was a blur of dopamine hits, expensive champagne, and the intoxicating scent of brand new leather. Adam didn't see the money as capital to be invested, he saw it as an infinite fountain of consumption. This is the lottery effect, where sudden wealth creates a psychological blind spot toward future financial security. He started by quitting his job with a grand, dramatic exit that burned every professional bridge behind him. Without a daily routine or a sense of purpose, Adam began to drift into a world of pure indulgence. His first major purchase was a $5 million mansion that required $20,000 a month just in basic maintenance. Most people forget that luxury assets are actually liabilities that eat while you sleep, draining your cash flow. He filled the garage with 6 Italian supercars, believing that status symbols were the same as true success. Every swipe of his black card felt like a victory, but the latte factor was now a luxury factor. He began treating his entire social circle to 5-star dinners costing upwards of $10,000 per night. Adam's friends multiplied overnight, all of them praising his generosity while eyeing the depth of his pockets. The psychological phenomenon of lifestyle creep was setting in, making his old life seem like a distant nightmare. He ignored his accountant's warnings, viewing the 1% of the world as his peers rather than his goal. "I have 50 million, he would shout. "I could never spend this much in a single lifetime." But the math of wealth destruction is ruthless, especially when you have no recurring income to offset spending. He started investing in ideas pitched by cousins he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. None of these businesses had a floor or a ceiling. They were simply black holes for his capital. He bought a private jet on a whim, failing to calculate the cost of fuel, pilots, and hangar fees. Every yes to a luxury purchase was a no to his future self's financial freedom and stability. Adam was living the high-stakes drama of the ultra-rich without the foundation of a billionaire's mindset. He neglected the power of compound interest, which works just as effectively in reverse when debt starts piling. By the end of year 1, Adam had already burned through $15 million with 0 assets generating cash. He believed the market volatility wouldn't affect him because he wasn't in the market, he was the market. This arrogance is the primary reason why 70% of lottery winners go bankrupt within a few years. He started hosting legendary parties where the cost of the flowers alone could have funded a college degree. Amidst the flashing lights and loud music, the silence of his dwindling bank balance was becoming deafening. His daily habits shifted from waking up at 6 a.m. to waking up at 2 p.m., hungover and confused. True wealth is the ability to fully live life, but Adam was becoming a slave to his possessions. He didn't realize that his net worth was anchored to a pile of cash that was rapidly evaporating. In the words of Warren Buffett, if you buy things you do not need, you will soon sell things you need. Adam thought he was the exception to the rule, the one who could outspend the laws of economics. But the red flags were appearing. His bank started calling about unusual activity and insufficient liquidity. He laughed them off, ordering another round of expensive watches for his entourage of yes-men. Little did he know, the first year was the honeymoon, and the storm was about to make landfall. As year 2 began, the new money smell started to fade, replaced by the stinging scent of reality. Adam woke up one morning to find his premier bank account frozen for review due to lack of liquid collateral. This is the moment most people panic. They have the net worth on paper, but zero cash to pay the gardener. He had fallen into the trap described in The Richest Man in Babylon. He was spending his seeds instead of planting them. Instead of seeking a financial mentor, Adam decided to double down to prove to everyone he was still winning. He entered the world of high-stakes gambling, believing his lucky streak from the lottery would translate to the poker table. Las Vegas became his second home, a place where the house always wins and the lights never go out. He lost $2 million in a single weekend, a sum that could have provided a lifetime of passive income if invested in index funds. His daily habits were now completely toxic. Breakfast was a cocktail, and work was chasing losses at the casino. Back home, the yes men were starting to notice the cracks in his armor and began making their exit strategies. Adam tried to buy back their loyalty with even more extravagant gifts: Rolexes, designer bags, and paid vacations. This is emotional spending at its peak, using money to fill a void of loneliness that the money itself created. He received a massive tax bill that he hadn't prepared for. The IRS doesn't care about your lifestyle, only their share. To pay the taxes, Adam had to sell his first supercar at a $300,000 loss because of instant depreciation. Watching his Lambo drive away on a flatbed was the first time Adam felt the cold breath of poverty again. But he didn't stop. He told himself, "It's just one car. I still have 5 more and the mansion." He began taking out bridge loans with predatory interest rates to maintain his monthly overhead. As Tony Robbins says, where focus goes, energy flows, and Adam was focused entirely on maintaining an illusion. He was now a victim of the comparison trap, trying to outspend actual billionaires who had 100 times his wealth. His relationship with his family soured as he accused them of only wanting his money, which sadly was partially true. Paranoid and isolated, Adam spent $500,000 on a state-of-the-art security system he didn't actually need. The mansion that was supposed to be a sanctuary was starting to feel like a very expensive, gilded cage. He missed the simple joy of a home-cooked meal, now replaced by Michelin star food that tasted like ash. Financial literacy isn't just about math. It's about the discipline to say no when your ego wants to say yes. Adam's latte factor was now the $50,000 monthly lifestyle tax he paid just to keep his lights on. By the midpoint of year 2, his initial $50 million had dwindled to less than $20 million in accessible cash. Most of his wealth was now trapped in depreciating assets that were incredibly hard to liquidate quickly. He tried to launch his own fashion brand, pouring $3 million into a project with no market research or business plan. It was a vanity project, a way to see his name in lights while his bank balance sat in the shadows. The fashion line failed within 6 months, leaving him with warehouses full of clothes nobody wanted to buy. This is the sunk cost fallacy, pouring more money into a losing hand because you've already spent so much. He started ignoring his mail, the envelopes from banks and law firms piling up like a paper mountain of dread. His health began to decline. The stress of fake it till you make it was manifesting as physical exhaustion. He realized that he was no longer the owner of his money. The money and the debt now owned him. Every time he looked in the mirror, he didn't see a winner. He saw a man drowning in a sea of gold. He made one last Hail Mary move. He invested his remaining $10 million into a highly speculative cryptocurrency. He didn't understand the tech. He only heard the word moon and 100x from a random person at a bar. This is the gambler's ruin, the desperate attempt to win it all back in one final, uncalculated move. For a week, the charts went up, and Adam felt like a genius again, ordering more champagne for his empty house. Then, on a Tuesday morning at 4 a.m., the market crashed, and 80% of his remaining wealth vanished in hours. The crypto crash wasn't just a financial blow, it was the final puncture in Adam's ego-driven balloon. He sat in his $5 million mansion, which now had the electricity cut off because he forgot the $4,000 bill. This is the irony of the ultra-rich facade, living in a palace but eating cold beans by candlelight. As Dave Ramsey says, we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. Adam's friends had vanished faster than his Bitcoin, leaving only the echoes of their fake laughter behind. He realized that without his bank balance, he had no identity, no purpose, and no plan. Year 3 became the year of the fire sale, where luxury met the cold, hard floor of the secondhand market. He listed his designer watch collection, only to find that half were replicas sold to him by trustworthy associates. The $100,000 watches he thought were investments were worth barely $5,000 on the resale market. This is the illiquidity trap. Owning things that look expensive but cannot be converted to cash when you're starving. He sold 3 more cars just to cover the property taxes on a house he could no longer afford to heat. The high-stakes drama had shifted from "how much can I spend" to "how much can I save from the wreckage." He began to experience the scarcity mindset, a paralyzing fear that every dollar spent was a step toward the grave. Yet his daily habits remained broken. He still ordered expensive takeout because he never learned how to cook. He was stuck in a K-shaped personal recovery, where his pride stayed high while his capital plummeted. One afternoon, a process server arrived at his gate. The bank was officially foreclosing on the mansion. The unfold studio of his life was collapsing, and the cinematic ending was looking more like a tragedy. He tried to call the cousins he had invested in, but their phones were disconnected or their hearts were cold. They saw him as a sunk cost, a man who was no longer a golden goose but a liability. Investing habit tip: never invest in people or businesses that don't have skin in the game or a proven track record. Adam spent his nights staring at his remaining $2 million, watching it bleed out through legal fees and interest. He was being sued by a former assistant for, quote, unpaid bonuses he had promised during a drunken party. The lifestyle creep had left behind a trail of legal landmines that were now exploding one by one. He moved into the smallest guest room of his own mansion to save on the cleaning and climate control costs. It was a pathetic sight. A lottery winner hiding in a corner of his own excess, shivering in a designer coat. He finally picked up a book on finance, not to get rich, but to understand why he was now so poor. He read about delayed gratification, a concept he had ignored for 3 years of instant dopamine. He realized that if he had simply put his winnings into a 5% high-yield account, he'd have $2.5 million in annual free money. Instead, he had traded a lifetime of freedom for 3 years of being a temporary king. The emotional storytelling of his life was now reaching its darkest chapter, the realization of wasted potential. He started selling his designer clothes on eBay, packing boxes himself in the middle of his marble foyer. Each box he taped shut felt like a coffin for a different part of the winner Adam persona. His motivation talk to himself was no longer about winning big, but about surviving the day. He looked at his latte factor, the $15 coffees, and realized they were the least of his problems compared to the $15,000 jet fees. He was a victim of the wealth gap between his actual assets and the image he felt forced to project. By the end of year 3, the mansion was sold at a public auction for 60% of its original value.
Adam stood on the sidewalk with 4 suitcases, watching a stranger change the locks on his dream home. He had $500,000 left, still a lot to some, but to Adam, it felt like being absolutely penniless. He moved into a 2-bedroom apartment, the silence of the neighborhood a stark contrast to the roar of the city. He had 2 years left before the 0 mark, and the momentum of his fall was only accelerating. Year 4 felt like a slow-motion car crash where Adam was both the driver and the helpless witness. He was down to his last $500,000, which sounds like a fortune until you realize he owed $800,000 in back taxes. This is the negative net worth trap, where your lifestyle has outpaced your ability to even stay at 0. He spent his mornings in a cramped apartment, the walls thin enough to hear his neighbors' mundane, stable lives. The high-stakes drama was no longer about luxury, it was about the fear of the mailbox and the ringing phone.
He tried to get a regular job, but his resume had a 4-year gap labeled lottery winner, which terrified employers. As Morgan Housel notes, luck is the brother of risk, and Adam had mistaken a stroke of luck for a personality trait. He was overqualified for entry-level work, but lacked the current skills for the professional world he once knew. He started selling his remaining status symbols, the last of his designer shoes, the high-end espresso machine, the MacBook. Each sale felt like a piece of his soul was being auctioned off to a stranger for 20 cents on the dollar. He finally visited a financial counselor, a woman who looked at his 48-month spending history with visible horror. "You spent $2 million on miscellaneous entertainment in year 1?" she asked, her voice echoing in the small office. Adam couldn't answer. He couldn't even remember where that money went. It had simply evaporated into the atmosphere. This is the danger of invisible spending, where small, unchecked leaks eventually sink the largest of ships. He was advised to file for bankruptcy, but his pride, the last thing he had left, wouldn't let him sign the papers. He still believed in a magic bullet, a way to trade his last few thousands for $1 million comeback. He fell for a get-rich-quick scheme online, a classic trap for the desperate and the financially illiterate. He sent $50,000 to an investment guru in a foreign country, hoping for a 500% return in 30 days. The guru disappeared within 48 hours, leaving Adam with a dead link and a hollow pit in his stomach. Relatable daily habit, he started skipping meals to save $15, a tragic irony for a man who once tipped $500 for a steak. He realized that investing habit number 1 is protecting your principal, and he had thrown it off a skyscraper. His emotional storytelling reached a breaking point when he had to call his mother to ask for grocery money. The woman he had promised a mansion and a private chef was now sending him $50 via a mobile app. The shame was a physical weight, a crushing pressure that made it hard for him to even walk down the street. He saw a billboard for the lottery, a new jackpot of $100 million, and he felt a surge of literal nausea. He realized that the winning ticket had been the worst thing that ever happened to his character and his future. Year 4 was the year of social death, where he stopped answering texts and deleted his social media accounts. He couldn't bear to see the filtered lives of others, while his own reality was a cluttered 1-bedroom purgatory. He spent his nights reading The Total Money Makeover, finally understanding the baby steps he should have taken. He learned about sinking funds and emergency savings, concepts that would have saved him if applied in year 1.
But knowledge without time is a bitter medicine. He knew the answers now, but he had no capital to apply them. He was a financial educator of what not to do, a living, breathing cautionary tale for the masses. His car, the very last one, a modest sedan, was repossessed in the middle of the night from the apartment lot. He watched from the window, his reflection ghostly and thin against the glass as the tow truck drove away. Motivation talk tip: success is a slow build, Anything that comes instantly usually leaves just as fast. By the end of year 4, Adam's total liquid assets were less than $10,000, with debt totaling over $1.2 million. The legal fees from his various lawsuits were piling up, and he could no longer afford a lawyer to defend him. He stood in a public library, using the free internet to research how to represent yourself in court. The man who once flew private was now taking the bus to a library to save on his data plan. The stage was set for the final year, the year where the numbers finally hit the absolute bottom, 0. Year 5 arrived not with a bang, but with a silent, heavy finality. Adam's bank account finally hit $0.00, a number that looked like a cold, empty eye staring back at him. He was officially a statistic, one of the many lottery winners who lost it all in exactly 60 months. He sat on the floor of his apartment, which was now empty except for his suitcases and a few books. The high-stakes drama had ended. There were no more assets to seize and no more friends to lose. He felt a strange, terrifying sensation he hadn't felt in 5 years, a sense of peace. When you have nothing left to lose, you finally have the freedom to be honest with yourself. He realized that the $50 million wasn't a gift, it was a test of character that he had failed spectacularly. As Jim Rohn said, become a millionaire not for the $1 million, but for what it will make of you. Adam hadn't become a millionaire, he had simply been a man with $1 million. There is a massive difference. He walked to a local diner and applied for a job as a dishwasher, his hands shaking as he filled out the form. The manager looked at his $2,000 designer watch, the very last item he refused to sell, and raised an eyebrow. Adam took the watch off, handed it to the manager, and said, "I don't need to know the time, I just need to work." He started at $12 an hour, scrubbing plates that once held food he couldn't afford to look at. This was his motivation talk in action, the humility of starting over from the absolute bottom. Every paycheck was now a victory. $400 of hard-earned money felt more real than the $50 million ever did. He followed the 50-30-20 rule religiously, 50% for needs, 30% for debt, and 20% for a tiny growing savings. He lived on rice, beans, and the determination to never be a slave to an image ever again. Relatable daily habit. He started walking 3 miles to work to save on bus fare, using the time to listen to finance podcasts. He learned about value investing and the index fund strategy he had once mocked as too slow. He realized that wealth is not a jackpot, it is a collection of thousands of small, disciplined decisions. 1 year into his new life, he had saved $5,000, a tiny fraction of his old wealth, but his first true asset. He began sharing his story at local community centers titled The $50 Million Mistake. People didn't see a loser, they saw a man who had survived a storm and found his way back to shore. He was finally becoming the financial educator he was meant to be, through the lens of failure. He reconciled with his mother, not with a check for a mansion, but with a humble bouquet of grocery store flowers. She hugged him and said, "I have my son back. That's worth more than any lottery." Adam's Unfold studio was now producing a new kind of content, the raw truth about money and the human ego. He understood that compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world, but character is the foundation it sits on. He no longer looked at the lottery billboards, he looked at his savings account and smiled at the slow growth. Investing habit. He automated his savings so that he never had to decide to be disciplined, it just happened. He was no longer Adam the winner or Adam the loser, he was just Adam. 5 years of chaos had taught him that money is a magnifying glass, it only makes you more of what you already are. If you are greedy, money makes you a monster. If you are disciplined, money makes you a builder.
He eventually worked his way up to manager of the diner, using his industrial trust strategies to grow the business. He was living a K-shaped recovery, but this time the line was going up for all the right reasons. The video speech of his life was no longer a tragedy, it was a masterclass in resilience. If you're watching this and waiting for a big break, remember, a big break without a big foundation is a collapse. Build your habits before you build your empire, so when the empire comes, it has a place to stand. This is the story of the man who lost $50 million and finally found himself.